Imagine hanging over a pitch-black abyss in the middle of a screaming blizzard. You're dangling by a single nylon rope, and your best friend, the person you trust most in the world, is holding the other end. But there's a problem. You're a dead weight. Your leg is shattered, and you're pulling him off the mountain with you. If he doesn't let go, you both die. If he does, you plummet into the darkness. This isn't a movie. This is the true story of Joe Simpson, a man who was left for dead in the heart of the Peruvian Andes, and the 3 days of pure, agonizing hell he went through to claw his way back to the living. It was 1985. Joe Simpson and his climbing partner, Simon Yates, were young, fit, and incredibly ambitious. They had set their sights on Sola Grande, a massive, jagged peak in the Peruvian Andes that stands at over 20,000 feet. It's a beautiful mountain, but it's a killer. They wanted to climb the west face, a vertical wall of ice and rock that had never been conquered. They were fast, they were light, and they were confident. But the mountains don't care about your confidence. They reached the summit, but the celebration was short-lived. Almost immediately, the weather turned. A brutal storm rolled in, turning the world into a blinding white void of ice and wind. As they began their descent, disaster struck. Joe was navigating a vertical ice cliff when he slipped. He didn't just fall, he came down hard, landing in a way that pushed his lower leg bone right through his knee joint. In the world of high-altitude climbing, a broken leg is usually a death sentence. There are no helicopters coming for you at 19,000 feet. There's no mountain rescue team waiting at the bottom. There's just you, your partner, and miles of vertical ice. When Simon reached him, he saw the look in Joe's eyes. They both knew what this meant. But Simon refused to leave Joe behind. He came up with a desperate, heroic plan. He tied two 300-foot ropes together. He would lower Joe down the mountain, one rope length at a time. He would sit in the snow, brace himself, and slowly let Joe slide down the ice. Then, Joe would signal him, Simon would climb down to meet him, and they'd do it all over again. It was slow, it was painful, and it was working. For hours, they fought the mountain in the dark. Until they hit the edge of the world. In the blinding snow and pitch blackness, Simon unknowingly lowered Joe over the edge of a massive, hidden cliff. Joe wasn't sliding anymore. He was dangling in midair, spinning in the void. He couldn't touch the wall. He couldn't climb back up because his hands were frozen blocks of ice and his leg was useless. Above him, Simon was sitting in a seat he had carved into the snow, feeling Joe's entire weight pulling him slowly toward the edge. For over an hour, they stayed like that. Simon couldn't hear Joe's screams over the howling wind. Joe couldn't see anything but blackness below. Simon felt himself slipping. The snow seat was giving way. If he didn't act, the mountain would take them both. With trembling, frozen fingers, Simon reached for his knife. He did the unthinkable. He cut the rope. Joe felt the tension snap. He plummeted through the air and disappeared into a crevasse, a deep, vertical crack in the glacier. Simon, now safe but devastated, stayed on the mountain until morning. When the sun came up, he crawled to the edge of the crevasse and called Joe's name. He heard nothing but the wind. No one survives a fall like that. Heartbroken and exhausted, Simon eventually climbed down the rest of the mountain to their base camp, carrying the weight of his friend's death on his shoulders. But Joe wasn't dead. He had landed on a narrow ice ledge inside the crevasse. When he woke up, he was surrounded by a haunting blue light. He was at the bottom of a frozen cathedral. Above him, the opening of the crevasse was a tiny speck of light. He knew he couldn't climb out. His leg was a mess of broken bone and torn muscle. Most people would have laid down and waited for the end. But Joe made a radical, terrifying choice. Instead of trying to climb up toward the light, he decided to lower himself deeper into the darkness. He hoped there might be another way out at the bottom. It was a total gamble. He tied a knot, gripped the rope, and abseiled further into the freezing pit. Miraculously, he found a slope of snow that led to a small hole. He crawled through it, and suddenly, he burst out onto the surface of the glacier. He was out of the hole, but he was miles away from help, with no food, no water, a shattered leg, and a mind that was starting to break. What followed was one of the most incredible feats of human endurance ever recorded. For the next 3 days, Joe Simpson crawled. He didn't walk. He couldn't. He hopped on one leg until he was too tired, then he crawled on his hands and knees. When his knees gave out, he dragged himself on his elbows. Every inch was pure agony. His broken leg would snag on rocks, sending jolts of white-hot pain through his body that made him vomit and black out. He was severely dehydrated. He started eating snow, but it didn't help. He began to hallucinate. He felt like there was a second person with him, someone encouraging him to keep moving. He became obsessed with a song Boney M's "Brown Girl in the Ring." It played on a loop in his head, driving him crazy, but it gave him a rhythm to crawl to. Left, right, drag. Left, right, drag. He had to cross a rock caterpillar, a massive field of jagged boulders. Every movement was a puzzle. If he slipped, he would die. If he stopped to rest, he would freeze. He was skin and bone, his face was blackened by frostbite, and his eyes were sunken. He was a ghost in a human body. He was so far gone that he didn't even feel like a person anymore. He was just a thing that moved. Back at base camp, Simon and their friend Richard were preparing to leave. They had packed up the tents. They had even burned Joe's clothes in a small fire, a grim ritual to say goodbye. They were literally hours away from walking away forever. If they left, Joe would die alone in the dirt. On the 3rd night, Joe reached the edge of the camp. He could smell the smoke from the fire. He tried to yell, but his throat was so dry he could only make a rasping sound. He crawled through the area where the camp latrine was, dragging himself through human waste because he was too weak to go around it. Finally, he reached the tents. He called out Simon's name. Imagine Simon's face. He opens the tent, thinking he's hearing a ghost, and sees a broken, skeletal version of his friend lying in the dirt. Joe had lost 1/3 of his body weight. He looked like a nightmare. But he was alive. Joe didn't blame Simon for cutting the rope. In fact, he thanked him. He knew that if Simon hadn't cut it, they both would have died on that cliff. It was a cold, hard mathematical choice that allowed one of them to live, and by some miracle, Joe fought his way back to join him. Joe Simpson underwent 6 surgeries and was told he would never climb again. 2 years later, he was back on the mountains. This story isn't just about a mountain accident. It's about the terrifying strength of the human will. It reminds us that no matter how deep the hole you've fallen into, there is always a way out, if you're willing to crawl for it.
Almost gone.